All right, Chris, you want to get going?
Sure, let's do it. Welcome, everybody. Really excited to have both Hiten and Jack here today to talk about working from home. We've all been doing it here for quite some time. I don't know. We've been work from home for 6 weeks. I don't know how long you have. Somewhere in the same ballpark, but everybody here went into shelter in place, I think, mid-March. So for some of you, it's new. For some of you, you've been sort of remote and or working from home, having employees work from home, having remote offices for some period of time. And some of you, like Heaton, are experts and have been doing this for 17 years. So I wanted to quickly run through both Jack and Heaton's background. First, just a quick logistical note. It's meant to be helpful for all the people on the call to ask lots of questions and for this to be an open dialogue. I'm sure Jack and Heaton will banter back and forth quite a bit about what they've seen and what works for them. And they both run companies in this sort of next generation work tools to enable work from home and make it easier for employees to collaborate and communicate. And so we're just thrilled to have them here. So let me do the quick sort of obligatory bios, and then we'll let you guys run with it. Jack is the founder and CEO of Lattice, a San Francisco software company that makes software for performance management and employee management. In the 5 years since founding the company, Lattice has grown to 150 employees, over 1,800 customers, such as Slack, Asana, Pinterest, Cruise, and more. Before Lattice, Jack was the VP of Business Development at an e-commerce company called Teespring, where Jack and I sat next to each other, and that's how we met. In his spare time, he enjoys reading, angel investing, and playing with his 4-month-old kiddo, who is super cute. Hiten is CEO and co-founder of FYI, a document-focused work collaboration app. He previously started Crazy Egg and Kissmetrics, both in the analytics space. He's been working remotely for 17 years and also is an investor advisor to several remote-first companies, including Automatic and Buffer. And I believe you have a couple of kiddos that are maybe 10 and 6.
Yep.
So, some of this conversation could be also about juggling family and how you make that work. So with that, I'll turn it over to the two of you to kick things off.
Cool. Well, I get to interview Heaton because he's the one who knows how remote work works.
Maybe.
And I've been excited to do this. And I'm basically just going to use this as like my chance to learn because we are thrust into this. And what's cool is I've looked up to you because most people can't start, starting one successful company is ridiculously hard. You've done it multiple times and you've been doing it remote the whole time. So the fact that you've done that means something must be working. And we were just chatting for a minute before this about why you think remote is so great. So I'm pumped to have this chat.
I'm here to hear about your challenges so I can offer whatever my opinion is. I don't wish remote upon anybody, but it's here for everybody right now. We can definitely dig in.
Before we get into like the audience questions, maybe just like at a high level, what do you see as like the top advantages of remote? Like you've been doing it when you didn't have to. So like, why do you believe in it so much?
Yeah, my thesis before we all started working from home in the last 6-ish weeks was that it like remote work is like the new offshoring, and there are potential major cost advantages to it. And I think like when you the only thing that comes to mind on a high level at this point to me is like follow the money. And the money shows that like if you can make folks as productive as they are in an office, let's just say, if you have the ability to do that or make them more productive or create a team that's running really high, with high efficiency, I think there's major cost advantages. So the first and foremost before this situation for me was like, there's major cost advantages. I mean, I'll just give an example on our end. Like we've recruited about 7 engineers, let one go already in the last 2 months. And we've also interviewed folks who are sort of in the Bay Area versus all over the world. There's not a single hire we've made in the Bay Area remotely in that batch of 6 so far, or 7 actually. And our costs per employee is about half. across the board. And this is half, maybe even more than half. Like, for example, we're paying 150K for somebody who we interviewed other folks that were local in the Bay Area, even though they were going to be remote, and they were asking 250, 300. And that was like their starting point. And that's not counting equity or anything. So there are just some major cost advantages. And in terms of like expertise, quality of work and all that, like they went through our interview process, which is pretty rigorous, which is kind of another thing about remote. I think you need just different interview process to make it really work well. And we've kind of figured that out. I'm actually pretty proud of it because like we just figured it out in the last 3 months and haven't been doing much recruiting until then for this company. So the big thing is cost. And I think it's still going to be cost. Maybe the cost will go up a little bit because more folks will be remote and all that, but like there's that advantage. But then the hit, just to give you a contrast, based on my experience myself, as well as seeing Automatic and Buffer scale, specifically those two companies, I've been heavily involved in both those companies in many different ways. And my thesis today is like, at best, as the company scales, you have about 70% of the productivity you would in an office. And so you're fighting that, like literally, like you're fighting that as a team, and need to find ways around it. So today, not to like, shit on those companies or anything like that, because that's just not like my style or what I'm trying to say. But as I talk to folks on the teams over there, there's things like a really like long ramp up process to like get into the company. I mean, these are companies that started remote like a long time ago, right? Like 5+ years ago. In Automatic's case, I think it's like quite a bit more time than that. And if you care about productivity, I think the biggest challenge you have is productivity. If you care about it as an organization, every startup should care about that. So I'm actually curious to hear kind of any of the sort of challenges that you've faced with that recently as you flipped over to.
Certainly, and this touches on one of the first questions of like employee engagement in this, which I think is like a very related, Lattice is predicated on the idea that engagement and performance are related. So like I very much believe that, if people are not feeling all in on their work, to the extent that that's down, you're not going to get quite the same output, the same, thinking in the shower of creative sort of ideas. So I think there can be something missing. And that's been one of my big fears. It's funny because this is for us and for a lot of other companies, this wasn't an intentional part of our culture, but now it is part of our culture. And so it happened quickly and we didn't mean for it to happen. So that means we have employees who didn't sign up for a remote company. It means we, as a leadership team, we didn't intend to have a remote company. We didn't have time to plan for it. It's also happening in a world where so much else is going on besides just being remote. So it's hard, it's a little hard to say, but our experience has basically been, the first 2 weeks was kind of just like, oh my God, we're trying to get our footing. Then we sort of got our footing, people realized that, oh wait, life goes on and you can actually still get things done from home. What I'm worrying about now a little bit is, is the new rhythm that we settle into, like now that people know what working from home is all about, what's the steady state here? Like, are people gonna be a little bit less in it? Will the relationships be a little bit less strong? Will the sort of serendipity of the office be missing? So it's a little bit TBD there. I don't think we've necessarily felt the negative effects from that, but I am sort of curious how, and we're not, at a scale of company like the large ones that you've talked about, but it is big enough that, with the 10-person team, I can imagine keeping that engagement. But even for a small team, I imagine some of that's there. So like, what do you do to, when you're in a remote setting, keep people caring as much as they do when they're in it and sort of like, they've put on the VR glasses if you go into the office and now you're in it, versus at home, the VR glasses I have on are my like home, it's my home lens and I'm working in my home context. So like, how do you get that engagement and passion, or can you?
Yeah, we were actually curious about this, not just for ourselves, because I can definitely speak to our culture and all that. I think if you've done remote a long time, your answer to this would be very different than if you're talking to someone who's kind of flipped over and needs to figure a bunch of stuff out. And so we actually, at FYI, my company, we did some research recently and asked people what the number one thing that they think their company can help them with when it comes to working remotely. And it ended up, and it was an open-ended question. 9% said nothing. So I guess that's good. 31% said more communication or some form of that. And this was all not multiple choice. It was open-ended. So we were analyzing every response, which tends to lead to more accurate kind of understanding of the stuff. Another 30% actually said improved tools and resources. And then another almost 30% said improved culture. So, you know, when you think about it like that, I think like your norms for communication are almost completely upside down. When you could go tap someone on the shoulder, walk over to them, you know, talk to them during lunch, go on a coffee break with them, like all that stuff is gone. It's like gone for everybody. And, you know, and obviously we don't know when and how it's going to come back either, just based on the current situation. So what even in our company, I think one thing we did that we never did before was we have a channel called Daily Life, and people are just posting their daily life. Now, I'm actually controversially, and I don't suggest this to people, probably opposed to what I call crap like that. And the reason I say that is because I believe that people's personal time is their personal time, especially in a remote environment, and it's none of the company's business unless it's affecting output, right? Not input, but output. But that's just my like sort of I'm going to call it asshole attitude about our own team.
It's definitely a hot take, and it's definitely not the sort of norm that I'm reading. But I can see an argument for it that like how like in a world where I'm at home and it's like you know at Lattice we're having sort of like meet the dog or meet the roommate type of things, and that it's such a blend, and we're trying to do that. But there are ways in which that's a little bit of an encroachment. And like, do people need to do that? Like, they don't have to show you their dog or their spouse when they're at work.
Yeah, contextually, I'm very sensitive to remote culture in a different way than an office because the norms are not clear. And so when you start doing all that stuff, people think those are the norms, right? And I can tell you where I screwed it up recently too, but like, I think like I said, that's my take, might be a hot take. I don't suggest that to anybody else. So just to be clear, it's just, I just would rather give my take so that folks understand. But that means that our company's focus on output, right? And focus on results and not so much caring about what you ate for breakfast or what your dog looks like or anything like that. That being said, even for our team that is not greatly impacted by what's going on right now from a work standpoint, beyond like, you know, partners, spouses, kids, et cetera, being home, that's a whole nother topic probably. We created that room and it was actually, that one wasn't my idea, but then what else, but someone created it and it's been great. Another idea we had, and I'm just giving sort of some of the ideas because like even on a remote team, these are things I would never actually want to do. And I'll give the one thing that we do all the time after this one. So the thing we did is we have a designer and we actually created emoji for everyone's pets. Those little, you know, Slack emoji things. We created those for everyone's pets. So the designer did that. We had a call to action on like one of the channels and said, hey, just a picture of your pet, like we're going to make it an emoji. And I don't know, I think they're kind of being used, but it was an idea. I saw someone do something similar on Twitter and I'm like, hey, that's actually like, I don't have a pet besides my kids, I guess. But like we're a pet culture in the company because everyone else tends to have a pet. The majority of the company does. And they show up, you know, in these videos. So let's go bring them online. Right. And it's just a little fun thing to do. I think the last thing is like on a remote team, I found that one of the most valuable things we can do, and I'm at the end, I will put a whole bunch of these links. But internally, we have a document, it's not really a document. On Slack, we have a channel. It's called Daily Updates, and you just literally put bullets of what you did yesterday and what you're doing today, and that's across the whole team. I've seen it scale when you scale the business, have different teams. You put that in the team channel. You don't have to do it all in one channel. We do it all in one channel right now because we're about 15 or less people in Slack, and it was a game changer. And I'll paste in here our rules for it later, which is a deck I created to point out all the rules. I would want to do that even if we were in an office. And the reason is not monitoring, not Big Brother type stuff, but literally passive visibility. And it provides a tremendous amount of knowledge about not just what people are working for, but almost in a weird way, how they're feeling. Because sometimes they describe it in there, right? Oh, I got to work on this again. Oh, this bug, whatever, right? And so it's like this passive way of not necessarily task management or anything, but just seeing what the whole company is working on when you might not be in their sort of area or anything like that. So that's been a big one, and we don't use a tool for it. We just put it in Slack and have some rules. Again, I'll paste the instructions we have in our thing, but it's things like that I get excited about because they're small things. They're not like super foo-foo in any way or anything like that. And they're just like, and as long as it's clear why they exist, it's really useful on a remote team. Cause we do have some folks in Australia, for example, and, you know, they're getting up when we're not, you know, when we're sleeping and all kinds of stuff like that. So time zones is another thing that like, we are very sensitive of, but we actually don't care. I would rather have people all over the world than worry about overlap as much as I've heard other folks worry about it.
I'm sort of curious on the topic of monitoring and Big Brother and just productivity in general. I'm curious philosophically how you think about tracking and productivity and measurement and goals and all of that kind of stuff in a remote context. And the framing that I've had in my brain about this is, I think there's a lot of good ways to build a toxic culture. One good way to build a toxic culture is when you have people on teams where you've got some sled pullers and some people who are coasting. I think that really over time drives teams apart and becomes very frustrating for people. One nice thing about an office is that because you are sitting next to people, to some degree, the physicality monitors a little bit of that on teams. In a remote context, you can easily imagine that you've got some people who are really chilling and some people who are really overworking. Because I've actually noticed sometimes I'm able to overwork more easily now than I was when I was in the office, because I'm not gonna, like, I don't stay at the office until 10, but I might work at home until 10. And like that commute kind of stops me. And it's also just like a lot of times I'm finding that I'm so focused when I'm remote in a way that I'm not in the office. I get interrupted after 15 minutes with my headphones on. And so how do you manage that divide? Like, how do you ensure that that divide doesn't happen, but not be hovering over people's shoulders with a drone and, in all of their commits and all of that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I like to focus on process over people. And because I think these are process problems more than people problems. And the process problems are the bigger ones that I've seen companies face. So I actually have a thing I made up because we have these challenges too. And I think on remote teams, you have these challenges like times 10 in terms of no visibility and things like that. So I actually recommend people score their processes. So let's say there's a problem in product, right? And you feel like folks aren't like, there's just this mismatch, right? Of productivity level. So from an organizational standpoint, I think it's about process. From a personal standpoint, I think it's about people, obviously. So organizationally, and then there's like, I think the manager in the middle. So I'm just going to talk about organizationally first. So organizationally, I have this thing called the VACA method, VACA, and it stands for visibility, accountability, communication, and alignment. And I recently talked about this on a product board webinar. I made this crap up like just a few weeks ago because like I was trying to figure out like what would be helpful. And basically what I would do is take a process, like a product development, let's say it's a good process, or, marketing campaigns that you're launching, whatever it is, and score 0 to 5, 0 meaning you feel like there's nothing here. Like you don't even have anything here. 5 being you feel excellent at it, and score the process. And because the process has changed and you're working from home now, I think it's even more important to score it and figure out where you need to improve. So visibility is basically, can anyone see, anyone involved in that sort of process? So product development, let's just use, can they see what's happening? So that's visibility to me. Without visibility, I don't think you get the next one, which is accountability. And that's really like, if you can't see the process and don't know what's happening, how the heck can you hold people accountable? And that's really kind of the crux of, I think, the answer to your question, which is accountability. And then you have communication. And that's really kind of a core pillar of anything. I could call it collaboration, but I wanted to call it communication because I believe that if you can't, if you have visibility and there's accountability, how are you communicating with the team around kind of what's going on, around what you see and whether they're accountable to the work? So that's a manager's job in terms of one-on-ones and, all that kind of stuff. In some ways, and also just being able to ping someone and be like, hey, how's that thing going? And something that happens in an office all the time in ways that no one can measure or coordinate, but doesn't happen on a remote team without some effort. And then the last one is alignment, because I believe that an aligned team is the one that, is the only way to go. And I'm always looking for finding ways where we're not aligned. And, if you had people on our team on this call, they'd probably say, yeah, Hiten probably kind of overuses the word alignment, because I'll just straight up say, hey, we're not aligned. Let's talk about this, right? And that to me is more for me to recognize we're not aligned, and less so for me to communicate to someone else that, hey, we're not aligned, because I need to recognize it myself in order to really talk about it. Otherwise, we're talking like, between each other and stuff like that, or even texting between each other, and I think that's not fun. So I just score processes on those 4 criteria and see how you're feeling. And then the reason is you'll know where to focus. So for example, in our product development process, I think the pillar of this thing is in an order specifically. We didn't have visibility, and we were getting visibility from our head of engineering, and he didn't want to keep certain things up to date because he felt like he was doing repetitive work, and we were using like 2 systems instead of 1, and all this other kind of normal stuff you hear. And this was recently as we've scaled the team and now hired more engineers. And so we now have found a way to just evaluate our process along the lines of these things on a like regular cadence. Sometimes it's right after we already shipped something, so we can just make it better. And other times it's during a postmortem or doing some form of a review of a process. I think you end up having to review the processes in order to iterate them more, and you end up having to do more postmortems in order to solve some of these problems around organizational processes. In terms of like management and people, I've found that daily update channel actually helps me understand if someone is productive or not, and if they're having issues or not, without being big brother-y, because it's not about the tasks. It's about more like do they skip a daily update, or are they like tired of working on something? And then last thing I'll share is like, especially recently, I think first 5 to 10 minutes of a call, and I have a lot of meeting thoughts, but first 5 to 10 minutes of a meeting or a call, it's a bunch of like on our leadership team meeting, the first question is, how's everyone feeling? And my co-founder is definitely somebody who more sort of introduced that and wanted it, and I've kind of got more bought into it. She thinks I don't share my feelings. I don't know. I think she's heard more of them than anyone else on the planet. But anyway, so we do things like that. We go for banter in our product team meeting for 5 to 10 minutes. This is much newer since everyone's a little bit more inundated with lots of things going on in their lives, and kind of it helps people just feel more comfortable. So those are things we've done more on a management side to help people honestly with productivity.
A lot of that stuff works better if there's trust in the system, which leads me to a new question, which is my experience at least has been I'm in a remote setting, I'm able to maintain or even strengthen existing relationships, but I'm finding it harder to forge new ones. Like with existing employees, I find or like employees that I've had a relationship with already, I'm finding that over Zoom, I'm able to like, we're at enough comfort already that I'm comfortable, like, you know, I'll expose a new part of my life, or they'll be like, you know, my dog will like bark and it's fun. Like just like stuff happens, or even like, you know, I just had 4 one-on-ones this morning, and I did them all as like walk and talks. And there's something kind of nice about like, you know, like a lot of times with an employee, you have this like formal one-on-one, but like being on just a call for some reason when you're just like walking around, like there's something more intimate. So like I'm finding that, but then with new people, with, you know, like I'm also finding that it's harder to set up a new relationship. And I'm curious your thoughts on that is that the reality, and is there something I could be doing differently to build relationships better remotely? Is that just kind of the cost of doing business remote? Like, how do you think about building a relationship over Zoom?
I truly believe you have to get really good at building rapport, and you have to get really good at building rapport without video. So for me, my preference is that like, if I don't know somebody, I might get on the video, I might get on a call, and it'll be video for like as little time as I can pull off. And it's not because I don't like being on video. It's not anything like that. It's like, I think it actually, video is a distraction in your mind, or it can be. And so I would, even though most people would probably say, hey, get on video and this and that, I think, and I know there's this whole thing about Zoom fatigue, and we don't need to get into that necessarily, unless you think it's important. But I have lots of opinions. But like, I would rather hear their voice and start to understand them based on what they say to me without me looking at them or having to look at their face. And so the majority of my one-on-ones, pretty much all of them that I do, are all voice, and we don't get on video. And that's as long as the other person's comfortable with that, I'll do that. If they really want video, I'm okay with that too. But overall, for me, like, I want to be able to build rapport without having to be on video. And that makes such a big difference to me in terms of how fast you can do it, oddly as that sounds, because then people aren't trying to like look at your face and trying to figure out what you're thinking, or like, you know, your little mannerisms. Cause like, honestly speaking, it's much different on video than it is in person. Those mannerisms, like those movements, like, look, my arms are crossed right now. Like, and like, it shouldn't matter. Right. And it's not because I'm trying to do that deliberately, or I'm trying to hide or anything, or maybe I'm just trying to hug myself, which is why a lot of people cross their arms. But like, So my key is like, just learn to build rapport, and you can get some practice with people you already know. And if you don't know them, like what's wrong with asking a bunch of icebreaker like questions just so that you can get to know them faster? And to me, like the easiest way, and people think I'm a little weird. And again, this is very much like a me thing. I don't know if I wish it upon anyone or suggest it, but I will literally not have a single question for that new team member that I want to ask them. And instead, I will ask them if they have questions for me. And if they don't, then I will definitely prod and figure out things and ask them questions, but they're very high level, generic questions like, oh, what do you think about that big refactor we're working on right now? Right? How's it going in your mind? Things like that, but just a lot of stuff about the work. And from that and their answers, I'm able to figure out like, what's this person all about? How should I be speaking to them? And all that. So I think like rapport is the key.
Is your framing that it can actually get there, or that these are just tips to make it as good as possible, but it's going to be worse?
I've been doing this for 17 years. I used to do it on Skype where we couldn't do video because the video just wouldn't work. And I have built relationships with people without ever meeting them in person. Some people I've never met in person. And my only evidence is that there are people that I work with today that I've worked with since 2004, 2005. And we're all remote. Like, and I've met them, but like, it didn't matter. Like, it didn't matter to me. I don't think it mattered to them, to be honest. And like, the work's better when we're not in the same location, to be frank. And this is like designers, engineers, marketing folks, and I still work with them. And so I wouldn't work with them if we didn't have the rapport, right? I wouldn't work with them if I couldn't build that without video or all these modern tools that people are trying to use. We did it in documents. We did it via email. We did it via voice. I think the onus is on us to be human about it. And I think that's the challenge. It's actually, how do we be human when we're used to being human in a very tribal context that's community, and the way we thought about it was offline. I mean, this is just what we're sort of born into in the past, which is like this whole like offline sort of mental model. And now we're online, and like, this is how it happens.
How do you handle some of the like tougher management things as a human when it's remote? Like, obviously, like in the course of doing business, you do have to do uncomfortable things. Like, you might need to do a reorg that people aren't happy about. You might need to let somebody go. You might need to give critical feedback. How do you do those things humanly in this context?
Yeah, I think that the one word that comes to mind is vulnerability, and being able to show it, and being able to speak it if necessary, and speak about it. And I think that's really the key, because otherwise it's really easy as a leader in an organization to make people feel like you don't care, even when that's not your intention. And so finding whatever method you use to show care for others is really important, even in those situations when you have to deliver really bad news, hard news, whatever it is. I think that's one component, vulnerability. The other one that I've found is extreme clarity. And that's clarity in written communication, clarity in like, when you actually have to go talk to someone, be prepared. And a lot of people do that in different ways. For example, I can jump into some of the hardest conversations without any practice or even thinking about it. Someone can tell me the worst thing in the world, and I can handle it without any prep. My co-founder Marie is kind of exact opposite. If she's going to get into one of these situations, she's going to want to double check things. She's going to want to ask like myself or a head of engineering, depending on, you know, who it is and what matters, about the comms and what to say and how to say it, even though she's very capable of jumping in like me. I've seen her do it, but she doesn't prefer that. So I think to each their own. But what I found for myself is that even it's better when I prepare. It is better if I know and I can prepare. That being said, there's no discomfort for me doing that. So in a way, it's almost like, what would make you, as a person who has to deliver the news, most comfortable delivering it? And usually it's absolute prep, great clarity. And sometimes when it's really hard stuff, I actually recommend, as an executive team, writing out that FAQ of questions you think people are going to ask, and answering them in text, and making sure you send it after, if not before. that clarity is amazing. And on a remote team, it's so valuable. That FAQ model is kind of what I'd go after. And then I would test it with people internally until like those questions are pretty solid and the answers are clear. And that way, at least, like if you have to, and this is like layoffs and all that jazz, right? Things that are like super hard and none of us will actually want to do, when it's like more of a group thing. When it's like one-on-one, I think it's that vulnerability, empathy, and just ability to like feel clear about your communication. It's the clarity. To me, like I found that if you're unclear, the lack of clarity is the biggest challenge when it comes to communicating things, anything, especially the hard things. And you don't know what's going on in someone's head when you're telling them something really challenging for them to hear.
Yeah, no, I think the FAQ thing in particular, we've found that too, that prepping yourself for anything that's going to come back, if nothing else, gives you the confidence when you go into it.
Yep.
Okay, I want to ask one more question, and then we can open up to Q&A. And I know there's more questions in the doc, so in case there weren't enough, we've got plenty here. But I want people to be able to respond based on what we've talked about. But so I'm a new parent. You've got 2 kids.
Yes.
People are either a parent or they work with parents. So can you talk about the perspective, I guess, from a parent of how do you make this work? How do you juggle it? Because like for so many of us, I think, one of these like schisms that I'm feeling and seeing in the world is that there is such a have and have not of time right now. Like some people have all the time in the world and other people are scrambling, trying to keep their company going, and they've got kids running around with every free second. So there's this massive change of like, I'm meditating for 4 hours a day and I'm Pelotoning twice. And I'm like, everything's amazing. And other people are like, are you kidding me? This is the craziest time of my life. I don't know many parents in the first camp. I'm sure they're out there, but I don't know. Maybe if you have older kids, maybe Chris's life is easy. But how, as a parent, do you like live your life working from home? And then if I'm working with a parent, like what do I need to be attuned to?
Yeah. I'm not, as I keep saying, I'm going to caveat it, right? I'm not going to be prescriptive. I think things work for different people. I can tell you my framework and way of thinking about it, but it might not work for you. So that's the big caveat there, because like there's so much context on this one and so many things that are different right now. I'll just give kind of a quick personal side of it. My wife and I have been dating since we were both 15. We're both 38 right now. So that's 23 years of knowing each other. We got married 16 years ago now. We both have a high level of consciousness on what we got into. And there's all kinds of things that like waterfall out of that, that sort of happen. And that make both of our lives, like, I think manageable and easy. So a lot of this boils down to more relationship advice, I would say, than anything else. And how you two communicate during like honestly adversity or challenging times. And then when there's kids, there's like more people, right? There's 4 people in this house right now. I'm super lucky to have actually a house where I can work from the bedroom, and I basically live in my bedroom right now. And that's just the way it works. And that can be a problem. Like the other day, like I think my wife got a little overwhelmed because she works from home as well, and nothing's changed for her for work in terms of like, it's just the same intensity as always. And then we have our kids at home and they're downstairs on the video, on video and trying to figure out school and all that stuff. And she's helping them with that. And I got to say, like, the way our relationship has been split up, like, I don't help with that as much as like, I probably could. I think should isn't the word, because she doesn't ask for it and doesn't like really push for it. And so, the way we work is that like, we just have to be really direct about our communication and make sure that like, if someone's bothered, each of us gets present in that moment and tries to figure it out then. There's no like chilling out or waiting for us, at least. We figure it out as quick as possible. We're both very focused on solving problems as quick as possible so that the next time it doesn't happen, right? So for example, for like a week, there's just a bunch of crazy stuff going on at FYI, and crazy not in a bad way, just things happening that made it so that I wasn't able to actually go and hang out at lunch or even at dinner enough. And she mentioned it, and she never mentions anything like that, but it's because she's dealing with a lot more stuff than usual. And she mentioned it, and that day, like, it was internalized, right, for me. And I'm like, yeah, I have the time. How the heck can I say I don't have the time for that? Right? Like, it's just not like, so it's almost like that idea of being present and being conscious of like other people in your household and what their needs are, I think is super important. Right. And again, like, I don't know, like I feel really lucky about my situation in many ways, including that. But at the same time, like someone else might have a whole different situation where like there's more requirements coming from their partner and things like that. Right. I have some for sure, but I feel like I'm so lucky that I have less because she just understands. And I understand too, because like there's a bunch of stuff on my side too that's like kind of abnormal too, right? Oriented around that. So my only thoughts are like we just have to focus on our relationships, I think, a lot more than ever before at home, and make sure that everyone's needs are met in a way that's like super conscious. And that's not normal. We hold back so much, right, in life, especially with the people closest to us, frankly speaking. And these days, I think a lot of those things can come out. And when they do, my only advice is just address them as fast as you can. We don't have the luxuries we did before of leaving the house or getting away from the person in the same way we used to. And even with the kids, right? Like there's like, yeah, there's so many times I have to tell them like to like lower their voice. Like that's my biggest challenge with my kids right now, honestly. Yeah. And like it is what it is, you know. It just got to make sure everyone's getting their needs met, and trying to make it so that everyone in the household has more consciousness around that, including the kids. And I think that's probably the biggest thing I would suggest.
That's good advice. Yeah, no, you're right, and it's so different in each situation. But I think just focusing more intentionally on your relationships can't possibly be wrong.
I don't think we have a choice. We're all stuck together for some unknown amount of time.
I think it's going to be a long period of time too. So
I don't disagree, and I don't usually say it with a double negative. So,
okay, I want to make sure we have time if anybody who's listening wants to throw some stuff in. Or Chris.
Jack, what would you have said to yourself 6 months ago pre-Liam? Like, how would you have thought about context switching for other people that are on your team that have kids? Like, I don't know if you can hit rewind, but the thing that you and I have talked a lot about is like there's sort of before kids and after kids, and it's so hard to put yourself in the shoes of parents when you don't have kids. You just don't understand how great. And then COVID and lockdown and like it has confounded it for everybody and made it really challenging. So is there anything that you would say to yourself 6 months ago of like how to context switch for those that don't have kids?
So a funny thing happened last night that sort of highlights, I think, how little I realized what I was getting into. As probably anybody does. But so my wife is a psych nurse practitioner, and she sees patients starting at 5:30 each day. So I basically can work during the day, and then she takes patients at night and on weekends, and that's our current setup. And last night at 5:30, she passes the baby off, which is great. And most of the time, so he's almost 4 months now. Most of the time, he's very chill and easy. Last night, he was not even a little chill or easy. And starting at 5:30, I had a last minute exec team meeting that there was absolutely no way to get out of, and didn't want to, like needed to have the conversation. And it was a very intense, good, rigorous debate. And while it was happening, Liam is just screaming his head off. And I'm getting a bottle out and I'm warming it as I'm like, negotiating all this stuff, and it's chaos, and Julia's on a call upstairs. So there was no way out. I couldn't end the call, and I couldn't, like, there were too many of us. And I was just like, this is nuts. And like, I kind of laughed through it, and I'm talking over, the baby sort of just like being like, ah. And I was just like, this is craziness. Anyway, that story I'm sharing, and there have been many other of those like chaotic moments that there's nothing you can do about, where before Liam was born, I think I know I did not have nearly enough empathy for the plight of parents. And I think like as we were approaching him being born, I was starting to put my head in the mindset of a parent a little bit more. And but I think back to certainly years ago when I would be like, oh well, being a parent that's not a free pass to not work as hard, and that's a trade-off that you decided to make. And I had these thoughts that now I look back and I'm like, how did I not that I would ever talk like that, but how did I even think that way? And now I'm like, oh my God, like parents need so much support societally that there's not nearly enough. And so I think if I could go back, maybe not 6 months ago because I was getting in the mindset, but if I could go back 5 years ago, certainly just like a different level of empathy and a whole different spin on it, that like it adds a complexity that is just like beyond anything normal outside of the complexity added by kids. And so like that would be that'd be my thing that I would tell myself about other parents. Or other non-parents, to just be aware of that, like, depending on the age of their kids, like, there's a lot going on there.
Is there a way that from a sort of HR perspective or a team perspective that you can communicate some of, like, people are seeing that chaos, but maybe not understanding the empathy, and like almost case studies or like things that you can distribute to your team to help those with and without kids to really understand and gain perspective of putting themselves in the other person's shoes with a crying baby in their hand, trying to do a bottle and having a hard team meeting. Like,
totally. Some of it, I think,
have you seen anybody do this well from a?
Well, I don't really know, because I don't know who's, I don't know what publicly I've seen. I think internally, I'm sure a lot of teams try to do this, and we're trying to do this. And now I'm seeing it as an opportunity, also as, a father, to be like, I'm taking full paternity leave, and I'm gonna like bring my baby into meetings when I need to, and to like expose that part of myself. And that's actually one nice thing about work from home, is to be like, this is what's going on, and to just be present and vulnerable about that, and say like, yeah, this is, I've talked about it all hands, like, this has been a crazy week and my baby's made it crazier. And so I don't know if we've done, like external content, but to the extent that we can, just like make it normalized and talk about it a lot. And similarly, bring it back to like remote. I think a lot of us, especially as leaders, we're going through this double life right now, where we are both trying to calm and soothe and be there for people and lead. And at the same time, we're just as human as the people that we're trying to lead. And we're going through a lot of those anxieties and challenges ourselves. And, we're trying to talk like we know where the world's going, but we don't know better than the people that we're leading. And, nobody, the news doesn't know, so we're in a crazy moment in time, and out of necessity, it's the blind leading the blind, because nobody can see clearly right now. And so that, I think, all you can do there too is the same thing, where you're honest about it. And I think, nothing breaks trust than acting like you know what you're talking about when you don't. And yet it's not an excuse not to lead. Like, you are still in the leadership position and you still have to lead. And so striking that balance between admitting you don't know what you don't know and couldn't possibly know, and that you're anxious too, and that you're a human too. And at the same time, there is a responsibility to lead. And so finding that balance, I think, is like the great challenge right now.
One question that came in prior was, given the abruptness of how we all started working from home, we talked a little bit about there's no longer these boundaries of work and life. How do we prevent burnout for employees? And how do we start to set some structure around making sure there is separation between work and life?
Having worked from home for forever, I think there's a sort of, there's an organizational onus, right? Like, there's a responsibility there to make sure folks are kind of capable of setting their own boundaries. And the simple way to do that as a leader is like, just be clear about when you expect a response for something. And when you communicate, do that, and use the proper channels too. Like, there are times when I will email people on the team instead of send them a Slack message, just because I know if I email them, I'm not slacking them, right? And our team is very much like, if anyone needs anything on Slack, they're on it. Like, especially like the three of us that are on the leadership side, but literally that's just the culture we have. And so, I just set expectation of response time on things a little more than usual, especially right now. But in general, it's like the medium matters, and you're setting your expectation matters. And I honestly think that organizationally, that's like just something you need to institute in order to have a healthy kind of balance, if you want to call it that. And secondary to that, as a personal kind of individual, if so many people, like especially on this call and in the organizations all of you run, are high functioning and like want to get stuff done, and like probably are nonstop in a lot of areas, that's just by nature. And you probably build teams like that, and people on the team are like that. At least like I've seen that continuously. And so just the awareness of what someone's cadence is, what someone's own like kind of timing is on that kind of stuff. And like Like if I like, on one hand, it's like if I see someone, it's weird. It's a really weird one. If I see someone up at midnight, their time, and for whatever reason, um, I almost want to ask them, why are you up? Right? At the same time, in some ways, if nobody's pinged them, it's none of my business. You know, like in a way, because it's like if they want to be up and work at midnight, one of the values of remote work is that they can do that. Right? Now, if they're burning out because I see them doing that over and over, I might just ask them gently. So there's one way to ask them, which is like, hey, you're up right now, which I don't think is the way I would do it. The way I would do it is more like, hey, I noticed that you're working at midnight, you know, a couple days in a row, just because I've been online too or whatever. I just want to make sure that like that's working for you, or are you just stressed out or something? So it's almost like instead of assume, it's almost like I wouldn't even probably say stressed out. I would try to have an unbiased question ready, and that's what I really focus on when it comes to understanding someone else's world or what boundaries they're setting or not setting for themselves. So I think there's an increased level of awareness where you are trying to watch out for the team in a digital world, in a world where we're all digital now. And that's one way to do it. And just increasing awareness and increasing visibility. As I kind of mentioned a bunch about process earlier, it's like if I can just tell that someone's like, you know, kind of working themselves into the ground, like you should be able to know based on, you know, lots of things. I mean, you know, in some ways, like it's hard to not pitch my tool in this case, because like we help you get visibility across like by just showing you all the documents that are changing all the time. That's like one thing we do. But really just whatever visibility you can get that's fair, not Big Brother, I think it would help you have that awareness. And it's really important in a remote environment. Like I make sure I have that visibility, and it's not anything creepy. It's just literally like, I want to know if someone's burning out is a big one, or I want to know if they're having trouble working. And there's also just normal cadences. So one quick awareness for me is like, we have a designer. We know that if he's not flipping over designs super fast, something's wrong. We have another designer who doesn't flip over things super fast, and there's nothing wrong with that. And that's the different cadence. That's what I meant by cadence. Like you just start as a manager and organizationally as a leader, start understanding the cadence of your team and different people on it. And if anything's off, just go check in. Like the number of times we check in with that designer, like when we know like 18 hours, 12 hours, 24 hours, whatever has passed, and he hasn't really sent over what he needs to, or what needs to be done, then we know something's up just right away. And both my co-founder are like, okay, we got to go check in on him. And one of us just texts him like, yo, what's up? You doing all right? And, you know, 9 times out of 10, he's not. There's something up, you know? And so I think that awareness is kind of the biggest thing, and find ways to get that without seeming creepy or anything, obviously.
A somewhat related point, and I guess you would see this typically with younger, more junior employees, but how do you understand if they're just busy for busy sake and it's not productive work necessarily versus they're actually spending a lot of time on productive work? So how do you tease out the I'm just working for show versus true productivity?
Yeah, I think that's in a way like the debate I keep hearing more recently, and I think actually Jack actually might have some thoughts on this, but it's like this idea of like input versus output, and what do you measure? And I think that's either a big topic already or going to become one. And again, I say Jack because I think HR folks tend to think about some of this stuff a lot more than other folks. So, you know, my answer is just focus on the output. And if the input's off, it's likely because, well, what you said, there's a lot of motion, not enough progress. And that's really the only way you can tell that is if the output's been clear, expectations have been set, and you focus on that. But I'd love to hear some thoughts from Jack on it.
I was literally going to say exactly input output as the framework. And I think this is, to some degree, this is where sort of like management ability comes in, and knowing how different teams and functions need to be managed. Because there are certain groups for which you should be basically only focused on the output and the process by which they get there. You don't want to micromanage. And then there are others where it's the opposite, where, you know, there's a lot of luck involved and it's actually the process that matters. And so this is where great management as a craft comes in, I think, and knowing, and, you know, some of it is a science, not an art. Like, you know, in some ways, you know, the way you would manage a sales team versus a very creative designer versus, you know, brand marketer versus a digital marketer, like those are all going to be different. But I agree. The framework is knowing whether you're managing somebody by inputs or outputs, and then adjusting accordingly. Because there's cases where someone's doing what's asked of them, and it's going to be useless work, and that's on the manager. And then there's the inverse too.
Great. I just want to let the audience know that they can certainly ping me privately if they have any questions. We have about 3 minutes left, so just want to make sure if anybody does have questions, they can chat Jamie privately, or you could post one publicly as well.
Got one I can throw out there. My name's Donald, by the way. So this question isn't really exactly specific to COVID, but our team is primarily centrally located in Chicago, and I'm out here in San Francisco. And me moving here has kind of prompted us to start hiring remote. We now have a few team members scattered around, but most people are still primarily in the same place and seeing each other every day at the office. So we've had to, make a few obvious changes, like a lot of decisions just like can't be made ad hoc over lunch. But still, it's a challenge to manage a remote team that is mostly in the same place every day. So I'm just wondering if you have any insights around that, how to make this easier, because the shelter in place is, hopefully going to come to an end eventually, and everyone's going to be back in person. And we're pretty small for reference. We're about 10 people.
Yeah, I mean, that's where I shared a bunch of links that are a bunch of the research we've done in one kind of summary of a webinar I did with Product Board. And I think like one, it's cultural, and two, it's a systems problem. And system includes process, people, documentation, the whole gambit. And so again, that's why I went into that whole method of evaluating your processes. It's really evaluating your systems, but it's hard to like speak of it that way. So like the only piece of advice I have for you on that is like, I would get hyper conscious of what impact the process and the system you have in place is having on the results in the business and the people. And so it's like, if something's not working, it's either a problem where like there's a lack of understanding and the expectations are mismatched, or there's like a just fundamental problem with the way you're doing it, which are two very different things, right? And so these evaluations need to happen almost in real time in a remote environment, when in the office, they don't need to happen in real time. Because in real time, what's happening is conversations you can't track. Productivity you're able to track productivity in a different way. It's like the butts in seat problem, right? Oh, people's butts are in seats, great. With remote, it's like, well, are they? Right? And so I think we just spend a lot more time on accountability and stuff. So I'm going to give one sort of quick rundown. So we have one major thing going on at the company. It's on engineering, and I'm just going to break down the document that was created for that plan. And you'll notice there's a few specific things in there. So it's basically a pretty massive front end refactor. Please don't ask me why we have to do that. It's a long freaking story. But there's a front end refactor going on right now that shouldn't have to happen, but whatever. There's a project overview section. It has background and objective written up. There's project goals. There's 4 goals. This is kind of a refactor, so they're very specific to engineering, like application speed, developer productivity, etc. I mentioned developer productivity though, because we are doing this in order to make developers more productive. So it's kind of an interesting one. Then we have project scope, deliverables, and like there's like 6 of them, and they're in categories. Then we have this thing that we added called scope exclusions, which is what's not going to be included, which I've found in office environments, people don't necessarily put in there. While in remote work, we put in the exclusion. So what's not going to be included. And then we have like things like detailed assumptions, constraints. I know these might sound generic, but I'm getting to kind of some of the more interesting ones. Known risks. So the risks are written down in 2 columns, risk and response. So it's the risk and what are we going to do about it? And this is all like in process of planning. No one's written any code, tons of planning going on. Then we have a tech stack. That's just for tech, like we wanted to make sure that we understood that. Then we have project tasks and schedule. These are literally the summary tasks, the phases, how many hours we think they're going to take. And all the stuff behind this estimation is like an intense amount of engineering work that's not in this document. So like they actually pick the tasks, pick the things we wanted to do, all like everyone on the engineering team made an estimate for each thing. And then they started messing around with like how many hours. Cause we actually on engineering, we do hourly estimates and we make sure that, we have a feedback loop on whether someone was able to deliver. Basically, we really believe in this idea of like the say-do ratio. And that should be 1-to-1. You do what you say you're going to do across the whole company. Right. And so this is really important to us. But the ones that I found are really important and we have key milestones. But the one I found, the section I found that was the most valuable was what we call the communication plan. And that's where we talk about visibility, which is basically, and in this case, it's visibility on project status can be observed in 2 places within GitHub, the project board and the milestones. So now I look in this doc, I go click on that link, I know exactly what's going on. And the onus is on the engineering manager, our head of engineering, to like keep that up to date and the engineers to do what they need to for him, but it's his job, right? And then the other thing is in the communication plan, we include the meetings. And so we have meeting, and so we have a table that's meeting, description, frequency, participants. First meetings, or not first meeting, but one type of meeting is initiation planning meeting. Another is a project progress meeting. Another is a project status meeting. And another is a project closing meeting. And then we actually have something called change control. And that's at the bottom where it's like any changes to the project that have been an impact, that have an impact will be documented here. So it's like change, impact on deliverables, impact on quality, impact on resources, impact on schedule, and other kind of impact and notes. The reason I'm sharing this is we're like 15 people or less. This is something you would do at 50 in my experience, or even 100. And a lot of companies don't do this. This level of detail prevents any misunderstanding. And that's why we do this. And that's why we make sure we do this. Now, this is estimated to be 8-week-long project, a majority of the engineering team, probably all of it actually. And so it's a really big initiative that's really important to us. And it's a hell or high water type thing. If we don't nail this, we are going to actually probably change directions in some core areas of our business because something's just broken. So overall, I think like that level of depth on documentation of the system, the process, the initiatives is the key. And it's not easy. Like every time we do something like this, there's a new piece that we figure out. And then the only other thing I would say is like lots of postmortems. You do something, you review it. Retros, postmortems, across almost everything we do, we're doing that. Even if it's a quick 5 bullet point set of bullets in a Slack message or something.
Well, unless we have any other questions, I think we're at time. Jamie, was there anybody else last?
Nope, that was it.
Okay. Jack, Hiten, thank you so much for joining us today. You gave a lot of great tips and advice and perspective around how you're managing through this and excelling through it. So really appreciate you sharing all your insights and spending the time today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Thanks for doing this.
Yeah. All right.
Thanks, guys. Everybody have a great weekend. Thank you so much.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.